Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to Interim Legislative Operations and Elections to order. Before we take roll, I would just like to communicate that we do have Leader Cannizzaro attending as alternate for Senator Lang today, and Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno attending as an alternate for Assemblywoman Gonzalez. And with that, Ms. Creamer, will you please take the roll?
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Here.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Orenshaw.
Here.
Assemblywoman Carlton.
Here.
Assemblyman Matthews.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Chair Miller.
Here. And Ms. Creamer, will you please mark Leader Cannizzaro and Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno present when they arrive? With that, I just want to cover a few quick housekeeping issues. Again, reminder to, I believe it's just Senator Gansert this morning that's on Zoom with us today. So to just keep your video on, and everyone else in those participating and presenting to keep their volumes off when not speaking. Also, of course, we all know we're all accustomed to turning off our cell phones and laptop volumes and anything else that could be disruptive during the meeting. Also want to remind everyone that's watching that the meeting materials are uploaded on Nellis. And on Nellis, it also gives the information for anyone that would like to call in for public comment as well. We will be taking public comment here in Las Vegas at Grant Sawyer and up in Carson City, as well as on the telephone. Those who are interested in calling in for public comment, the phone number is 669-900-6833. When prompted for the meeting ID, you will enter 872-9419-1010, then press pound. Also on the agenda is the information on how to email your comments in, as well as mail them or fax your comments. Due to a few scheduling conflicts, we will be taking some of the agenda items out of order today. So once we get further down the agenda, I will let you know which items those will be. And we will have a short break at some point, a 15-minute break sometime this morning. In between us, we'll not be breaking for lunch. With that, we can move into our next agenda item, which is public comment. We'd just like to remind everyone to keep your comments specifically to no longer than 2 minutes, please. And with that, broadcasting, would you please open the lines for public comment? We can, if there's anyone here in Las Vegas that would like to approach to make public comment, or anyone up in Carson City that would like to make public comment, please approach now. Not seeing anyone here in Las Vegas to make public comment. Assemblywoman Dickman, is there anyone in Carson City approaching to make public comment?
No, I don't think so. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Broadcasting, is there anyone on the lines that has called in that would like to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair Miller. To provide public comment, please press star 9 on your telephone to take your place in the queue. Caller, please press star 6 to unmute your phone.
Good morning. Could you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair Miller and Vice Chair. My name is Dora Martinez. I represent the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition, and I am just here speaking on behalf of my coalition, who are mainly people with disability, various types of disability. I just want to thank the 81st legislative session for passing the AB 121, and I cannot tell you how important that particular civil right is for people with disability and seniors. In the past, I have been doing public comment in other counties because they want to eliminate accessible, equitable voting, and I encourage you. I applaud you guys for passing AB 121 because it is really important for people with disability to be able to vote, especially with numerous barriers such as public transportation that are not available, like once before COVID, and public personal care attendant who cannot make it on time to assist people with disability to help them with voting process. So with that, I thank you all and have a happy Friday. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Once again, to provide public comment, please press star 9 on your phone to be placed in the queue. Caller, you're unmuted. Please proceed.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Beverly Harry. That's Beverly Harry, and I am the Native Community Organizer with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada. At PLAN, we believe our democracy is most vibrant when more people are able to participate in it. Previously, many tribes in the state had to travel up to 150 miles to vote, but after prevailing in a 2016 lawsuit that this was inequitable access to voting, the state passed legislation in 2017 to allow tribes to have their own polling locations. Over the last election cycles, we have worked to support tribes in requesting polling sites, hosting culturally sensitive get out the vote events, registering voters, and we have seen a growing enthusiasm in the importance of voting and the political process, as it means a lot to address the issues that Native people face. Because of the community outreach and the changes at the state level, we have seen a large increase in Native voter turnout. Yet there are a number of tribes who have not yet taken advantage of the polling place requests or who have faced pushback from the county election officials when doing so. It is important that the Secretary of State office increase outreach to tribal nations to ensure they all have knowledge of what the state is able to offer them and develop the government-to-government relationship with the tribes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harry.
Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no additional callers at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that, we will close public comment. Just want to remind everyone, we will have another opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. And we will move on to agenda item 3, which is the approval of the minutes for the meeting that occurred on April 1st, 2022. Committee members, you've all had time to review the minutes. Are there any questions on the minutes? Okay, not seeing any. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the committee meeting that occurred on April 1st, 2022.
So moved.
So moved, Chair.
Okay, so I hear a motion from Vice Chair Ornshaw, and I will take a second from Senator Gansert. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor, and Senator and Assemblywoman, if you could raise your hand up in Carson, if you're an A, so an aye. So all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, and with that, the motion passes. Agenda item 4 is the presentation on Native American voter engagement and voting on Indian reservations and colonies. Our presenter, Ms. Stacy Montooth, is the Executive Director for the Nevada Indian Commission, and she will be presenting in Carson City. So please approach, and when you are ready, please begin. I also understand that there is a PowerPoint with this as well.
Good morning, everyone. I want to warn you all in advance, this is my first time testifying in person, so forgive my pauses and the quivering voice. For the record, I am Stacy Montooth. I am here to discuss Native American voting outreach procedures currently implemented by the Nevada Legislature. Because we live, play, and work on the ancestral homelands of the Numa, the Nui, and the Washishu people who've lived in the Great Basin since time began, we hold the deepest respect and the gratitude for the 4 major indigenous groups, the Northern Paiute, the Southern Paiute, the Western Shoshone, and the Washoe people, not just the original caretakers of the land that we now call Nevada, but for their enduring stewardship and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Today, the Nevada Indian Commission reconfirms its commitment to improve the quality of life for our 27 tribal nations, bands, colonies, and the 60,000 plus urban Indians who choose to make Nevada their current home. Again, I'm Stacy Montooth. I'm a citizen of the Walker River Paiute Nation, and I am the Executive Director of the Nevada Indian Commission. I'd like to start by thanking this committee for hearing from me today and acknowledge Chair Miller. I appreciate your time. Moreover, I want to personally recognize the Washoe elders, their ancestors. As a Northern Paiute woman, I am in their tribal lands. I am a visitor, and I acknowledge and respect that. So, a little about us. So, the mission of the Nevada Indian Commission, as I remarked, we were created to improve the quality of life for the 27 tribal nations, bands, colonies, and those urban Indians that choose to make Nevada their second home. I am the liaison from those tribal governments to Governor Sisolak's office. In addition, I help to connect our constituents to all state services. As I mentioned, the Nevada Indian Commission was created in statute in 1965. My office operates out of the historic site of the Stewart Indian School. You probably know it's just a T-shot from where we are right now. It was a boarding school, an Indian boarding school that operated for 90 years. The original intent was forced assimilation. It was actually set up, endorsed by the federal government to kill the Indian, save the man, and this includes my personal experience. My 96-year-old grandmother attended Stewart. Today, the state of Nevada legally owns half of the original campus, and we have several offices, including the Nevada Indian Commission, the Department of Corrections, the Fire Marshal, Capitol Police, Post. All of these agencies are located out on the Stewart Indian School campus. The Nevada Indian Commission is the coordinating agency for that property. So what we do, we respect the sovereignty of those 27 federally recognized tribal nations that I have the honor of working with. We support, sometimes drive, the educational efforts that are created at the state level for all Native learners from early childhood all the way to higher education. on a regular basis, I myself do educational programs. That can be to educators, it can be to civic groups, it can be to elected officials, not only presentations, but tours of our campus as well as our cultural center. One of our missions is to preserve and protect not just the Stewart Indian School, but the cultural, the revitalization and preservation of Native American culture. So just a little bit more, again, about my office. So we are small but mighty. Again, I mentioned that the Nevada Indian Commission serves 80,000 constituents. So for those of you who are elected members, it's important to know that besides the County of Washoe, besides the County of Clark, the Indian nations, tribal communities, we have more potential voters than any other county with exception of the two that I just mentioned. Specific to the Nevada Indian Commission, again, small but mighty, we operate with a $700,000 budget annually, and I have a staff of 5. Please note that since the pandemic, since the fiscal year July 2020, we've been without one of those very vital staff members. So again, small but mighty, what I want to really make sure that you all are aware of, I'm certain you won't be surprised, the Nevada Indian Commission wouldn't be half as successful as it has been, not just with voter rights, but for the many essential services that our agency provides without so many public partners, public and private. So I'd like to take the opportunity to make sure and inform you that without the support of NARF, the Native Americans Rights Foundation, all voting is local, the Native Voters Alliance of Nevada, the Las Vegas Indian Center, Intertribal Council of Nevada, PLAN, you heard from earlier, we could not do what we have done. And I'm so excited to tell you about not just the results, but the potential for our constituencies. I'm going to refer to my notes a lot because this information is so important. I don't want to miss anything. In addition to those amazing organizations, Nevada's Indian Country is so blessed to have some very civically minded citizens. You have already heard from Beverly Harry earlier, community member at Pyramid Lake Paiute Nation, Alvita Martinez from the Walker River Paiute Nation. Walker River has really set the standard for all of our tribal communities when it comes to voting. Michael Ondelacy, Reno Sparks Indian Colony, he has helped establish off-site voting polling stations, not just on tribal lands, but at tribal enterprises that are just as convenient and just as important for other members of Washoe County as they are for the residents in Hungry Valley. Chair Janet Davis from the Pyramid Lake Paiute Nation, Miss Harry referenced a lawsuit. It was Miss Janet Davis who helped our brave veterans to take that lawsuit to the state of Nevada, in which they were successful in litigating better access to the ballot box. Tammy Tiger, she's an urban Indian who has chosen to live in Clark County for years now. Huge community organizer with connections to the to the Las Vegas Indian Center. Teresa Melendez, including the Secretary of State's tribal liaison, Mr. Anderson. There are dozens and dozens of more, but for time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. So here's the massive, exciting part. So we're going to talk about trends. Again, I'm going to refer to my notes, but specific to Nevada, I really am so proud to tell you all the Native American voters had the highest turnout of any demographic group in Nevada during the 2020 general election. The Native American communities recorded a 15-point increase from its 2016 voter turnout levels. Again, there are 60,000 people who identify as Native Americans who are eligible voters. That's just massively huge, and I strongly believe it's just going to get better. On the national level, the information is just as important. The past 2 election cycles have demonstrated the power of the Native American vote, not only locally but in federal elections. Native American voters were recognized as consequential electoral subgroups in many key races in 2018 and 2020. Those between 18 and 29 were the most politically active of all Native American age groups. We have a very young median age in Indian country. More specifically, 59% of young Native American voters encouraged their friends or their families to register to vote. That's how it's done in Indian country. You have to have that credibility. It doesn't come through commercials and public announcements. It's important, but it's those reliable familial sources. Further, 27% of this age group volunteered for a candidate or did voter outreach. Again, the median age in Nevada for our Native Americans is very young. There was a record-breaking 93 Native American and Alaska Native candidates who ran for political office in 2018. So, although the Native American trends to vote they tend to vote at lower rates than other ethnic groups, the published analysis suggests that American Indians and Alaska Natives tend to vote in midterm and congressional years, which is approaching, at relatively high rates. So we don't anticipate that we will see a drop in the voting rates for Native Americans in the 2020 midterm group, in the 2020 midterms. Second, Native American voters may be energized by the great momentum generated by some very positive outcomes for their collective interests during the Biden administration in his first term. Most of you will know we have the first Native American cabinet secretary in the history of this country. Not only is not only is a Native American citizen, Deb Haaland, a member of President Biden's cabinet, this huge prominent position she holds is for the Department of Interior. That is a part of the federal government that tribal nations deal with more than any other. And she's really used some creative ways to represent our Native Americans. And as a role model, we believe that her position will just encourage more voter, not just engagement, but our citizens to get involved in elected official capacities as well. I can tell you here in the state of Nevada or in this region, we do have 2 Native American citizens who are running for office. Shay Buckus is going to try and return to the legislature as a representative in Southern Nevada. We also know that we have a Native American in Southern Nevada who is looking into national office. That's Mercedes Krause. Currently, we have a Native American citizen, Candace Burcham, who holds a position on the Mineral County School District. We also have a former community member from the Reno Sparks Indian Colony, former tribal police officer Rodriguez is now on the Washoe County School District. I could go on and on. Again, Native Americans aren't just voting at the ballot box, but they are getting their name on the ballot to be voted, to run for office. I should note on this slide, I mentioned Mineral County. So the Walker River Paiute Nation had the highest turnout of any district in the last election in Mineral County. So let's talk about the efforts. And again, this is just such exciting news. And though the Nevada Indian Commission has the privilege of testifying today, we are not doing this in a silo. So regarding efforts, with the guidance from the Nevada Indian Commission, all voting is local, and the Native American Rights Foundation, NARF, has developed the Native Nevada Tribal Leaders Guide. This helps our leadership request voter services for their tribal lands. This deals directly with all the legislation that you all have passed that enables our leadership to request either an election day polling place, early voting, a drop-off site, and as well as voter registration on election day. During the last year, we had a really successful event despite a pandemic. It was referred to as the Res Tour. On the Res Tour, there was over 7 stops on tribal land. Native American elected officials, tribal councils participated, along with over 100 community members. We had sponsors that included Tribal Minds, the Nevada Indian Commission. Again, all voting is local, 4 directions. We had Assembly members Nathan Anderson, Sarah Peters, again, former legislator Shea Backus, they all attended. These were just open forums to talk to tribal citizens and community members about the importance of voting, the way you register, where your polling location is. We really emphasized that despite the generations, the decades of marginalization, when Native Americans vote, that is the day when we are all truly, truly equal. I'd like to talk a little bit about the process. Ms. Harry had mentioned this, so I agree with her that we don't have enough done yet, but I want to make sure that you understand the long way we've come. In 2019, there were no election services on tribal lands. In 2020, we had 11 polling places and ballot drop-off boxes. As Ms. Harry alluded, in 2020, we still had 4 tribal nations where there are citizens who were required to still drive at least 30 minutes so they could exercise their right to vote. For 6 of our tribal nations, they had to drive at least 30 minutes in order to early vote. So registration can now be done online, and that is a huge coup. However, you have to keep in mind that over 50% of our households in these rural areas, which, as you all know, was the federal government's intent to put my relatives and our ancestors in isolated areas. Today, 24 of the 27 tribal nations are in very remote areas, more than an hour from a community of 10,000 or more. These reservations lack stable internet access. There are very few physical places for our tribal citizens to register to vote in person. Those who do have Wi-Fi and could take advantage of Nevada's opportunity to register to vote online, our tribal IDs don't work with the system yet. So that's another important part that we need to work forward to. Keep in mind that Native Americans comprise 1.3% of Nevada's eligible voter population, 1.3. However, we only have 0.14% of our people registered. Again, we have some work to do. Now, with the pandemic dissipating, there will be more opportunities to register people in public gatherings, everything from the Stewart Father's Day powwow, which I shamelessly want to ask all of you to come to Father's Day out at the Stewart campus, to other big community gatherings, everything from basketball tournaments, again, to graduation celebrations and more. Before I move on to AB 432, I also want to give you an update of the outreach that has been conducted for our urban Indians. Just for the record, I want to clarify, urban Indians are those tribal citizens who aren't indigenous to the state of Nevada. So they are connected with a tribal nation, but not one of the 27 that originates in Nevada. Clark County has at least, according to the last census, at least 62,000 persons who identified as Native American from other nations, the Navajo nations, the Crow Nation, the Cree Nation, Blackfoot, again, those 27 nations that aren't indigenous to the state of Nevada. So tremendous voter outreach in the urban areas, and it has been driven and led by many of our partners, including the Las Vegas Indian Center. They've done outreach in high schools, specifically to our American Indian populations. There's been all kinds of tabling. Again, the powwow events, there's been pledge collections to identify Native Americans. We get their commitment in writing to register to vote when applicable. We work with our different tribal nations so that they understand the process for volunteers, for poll workers. For our people, if they are able to vote in their neighborhood, which most Nevadans enjoy, if our citizens go to cast their ballot and they see their neighbor, their auntie working at the poll place, another round face, it absolutely it absolutely elevates their entire experience. So we have professionals with the Las Vegas Indian Center that are connecting civic-minded tribal members with their local county registrar's office so that they can become poll workers as well. There's been a lot of work done, but as you must know, we have a lot to do. I'm going to go ahead and talk about a little bit of those recommendations. We think that it would be really terrific to have an appointment by the Nevada Indian Commission to work specifically with the Secretary of State's office on developing and implementing AB 422, a top-down voter database. This would include tribal affiliations. Currently, the state of Nevada isn't required to keep track of ethnicity. We know from our community data, we know from the census what powerful numbers we have, but data is so important. To have another source would just absolutely be tremendous. We also would like to look into requiring all voter systems to accept tribal IDs on same-day registration. That is happening in some of our counties, but unfortunately, we do have some poll workers, we do have some county registrars that aren't even familiar with the fact that the state of Nevada allows our tribal citizens to use their tribal IDs. It's coming, but not fast enough. And the Nevada Indian Commission is dedicated to working with those respective registrars to make sure that their poll workers are familiar with all those tribal IDs. ITCN passed a resolution that unanimously supported all of the enrollment offices at each respective tribal nations to work with my agency to ensure that we have copies of what tribal IDs look like before the poll workers open the polls for voting. We also want to talk a little bit about the elected officials from the Secretary's office, the Secretary of State's office, to the 17 county clerks and registrars. The administration of the new law is just so valuable. It's so vital. As you all know, there's been quite a bit of turnover with the administrators or the registrars at our respective counties. That requires our tribal leaders, our tribal citizens who are engaged in voter outreach to rebuild relationships. It's so important that we continue these collaborations. While AB 321 does not mandate election administrators to reach out to our tribal chairs or to our tribal elected officials, it really should be encouraged, and it really is a part of meaningful consultation and engagement, which other Nevada legislation refers to. Specific to AB 432, This is the new bill that allows a tribal agency to submit a request to the governor to become an automatic voter registration agency by 2024. I was asked in advance of today's hearing if any of our tribal agencies, specifically our tribal governments, have submitted a request for this. To date, I am unaware of any. However, again, it's important to keep in mind the issues with stable internet access. Again, the issue with registering using our tribal IDs, as that is the most frequent form of identification that our tribal citizens have. I believe it won't be long before our tribal governments do take advantage of AB 432. Again, just a few more details about the oversight. Again, we really need more help from our respective county registrars. That has to be implemented and driven by the Secretary of State office. Again, some of the registrars are just not familiar with the services that are available to our tribal nations per Nevada law. Again, the turnover of registrars really impacts the pre-existing relationships that our tribal nations have. And I just want to make sure that you all know, per federal guidelines, we have enough native speakers in the county of Nye to actually require that election materials be offered, printed in the Western Shoshone native language. Now, I know that today you're going to hear from a lot of your constituents that are going to talk about the barriers for voting for all subsects of Nevadans, but I just want to bring to your attention that there quite possibly could be a need to provide all the voting materials to Nye County citizens in our native language. Now, I know as legislators, you're probably first thinking about implementation and all the steps that that would bring. For a person who works at a former boarding school in which the mission was to destroy native language, I'm absolutely tickled pink that this could be an issue for the state of Nevada. Before I switch to my final slide, I just want to describe this last picture to you all. I think this reflects not just the spirit of our indigenous communities and their commitment to being civically engaged and participating in not just the Nevada system to vote, but in the federal elections. This is a photo of 3 tribal citizens on the Yamba Shoshone Reservation. For those of you that aren't familiar with that nation, you cannot get to their land base without traveling on a dirt road for at least 50 miles. To say that their constituents think out of the box is a huge understatement. In the last election, their community members found that it was much easier for them to collect completed ballots from households by riding horses and going door to door, having a tribal leader collect those ballots at the tribal administration building, their city hall, and then driving those completed ballots to the county seat. I think that this is such a huge reflection of the cooperation and the commitment that our people have to ensuring that they're able to participate in the process. I want to make sure that you all are aware of that. This slide includes my information. I know that I often think of great questions the next day. I'm always available to speak to not only elected leaders, but any citizens in Nevada about our tribal nations, their contemporary lifestyles, the history, anything related to voting, food distribution, healthcare. I'm here to help improve the quality of life, and that includes being an advocate and helping to educate all citizens about our tribal nations. I want to thank the committee for their time today. Again, specifically Madam Chair. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge all the hard work of Haley Prohl, I hope I'm saying her name right, from the LCB, and I stand ready to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Montooth. And I would let you know that not at all at any moment did it appear to be your first legislative presentation. So I know that you were nervous about that at the beginning, but you did a tremendous job. So thank you with that. At this time, members, do we have any questions? Our first question from Vice Chair Orangel.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Executive Director Montooth. Thank you for the presentation today. Just a brief aside, I had the honor of serving in the Assembly with former Assemblyman John Oseguera. I served under him when he served as Speaker of the Nevada Assembly. He's an enrolled member of the Walker River Paiute tribe, and I believe he's our first and only Native American Speaker of the Nevada Assembly. So a lot of great things come out of your tribe, a lot of great people. And just wanted to mention that. One thing you mentioned during your presentation that caused me concern about the tribal IDs being honored by some county registrars, but not by others. Which county registrars, if you have that handy, were not accepting the tribal IDs? And if not, if you don't have that handy, I'm wondering what you think would be the solution to that, because that was something that caused me a lot of concern.
Stacy Montooth, Nevada Indian Commission, for the record. Thank you, sir, for those kind words, and I really appreciate you recognize our Native American leadership in this amazing body, specifically former Speaker Oseguera. He is a huge friend and advocate in Indian country. Thank you very much for all your kind words. As a citizen of the Walker River Paiute Nation, I too believe there are great things coming from Schurz, Nevada. Regarding issues with voter IDs at respective counties, with all due respect, I would request that I be able to share that information with your committee via email. I do not have that information with me currently, but I can tell you one of the solutions. I had mentioned during my presentation that Intertribal Council of Nevada, which I sometimes call the United Nations of our tribes. This is a not-for-profit group that has memberships from all of the leadership of our 27 tribal nations, bands, and colonies. As a collective body, this organization voted earlier this year to direct every nation's enrollment office to work with the Nevada Indian Commission in providing just a Xerox copy of that tribal ID. My bag is behind me. I could whip out my tribal ID and show it to you. One of the things that has happened with our tribal nations, and it happens at the Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles, and happens at the Department of Motor Vehicles in every state in our nation, there are different looks to ID cards. So that's the case specifically for my nation. I have a different looking ID card than my sister does, as does my elderly mother, as does former Speaker Oseguera. However, they're all valid. I will admit, if you are not familiar with Indian country, it could be a bit overwhelming. If you're a volunteer poll worker, and in addition to a Nevada driver's license, which most people are pretty familiar with, and a Nevada ID, there are 6 additional IDs that need to be accepted. That could be overwhelming. But one of the solutions, sir, is that the Nevada Indian can provide the looks, again, just a Xerox piece of paper, to the Secretary of State's office, who provides that information, that documentation, to each respective county registrar, who then shares that documentation with their poll workers in advance. It's a cheat sheet, basically. I really appreciate your question. Thank you.
And thank you, Executive Director Montooth. And could you just give us some clarification as to when those tribal identification cards are being requested?
Those have been requested from the Nevada Indian Commission, and we are collecting them. It's my understanding that most county registrars want to have all their volunteers lined up by May. I expect that my agency will not have any issue accommodating that deadline.
Thank you very much. And I'm probably dating myself here, but growing up here in Las Vegas in the 1970s, we had a close family friend who also was a kid up at the Stewart Indian School. So I met someone who was at that place.
Vice Chair, did you want to follow up on that question, or? Okay, thank you. Members, any additional questions? And Assemblywoman Dickman, do you have a question?
No, thank you,
I
ma'am.
can't currently see you.
No,
Okay,
thanks.
thank you. I actually have two brief questions. I just want to follow up on what the Vice Chair asked. Ms. Montooth, when you're referring to individuals being asked for their ID, are you referring to when they're registering to vote? Okay, just wanted to clarify. So we're not talking about when they go in to vote, it's when a person is registering to vote. Okay, thank you. And my next question, just out of wanting to make sure that for my own personal edification, when it comes to data and understanding what we're talking about, I personally have always had the assumption that the term urban Indians referred to individuals who were not living on the reservations or tribal designated land. And you defined it as people who were not part of tribal communities indigenous to Nevada. So I just want to make sure that when it comes to terms and definitions, that I'm understanding it correctly. So with that being said, then it makes me ask the question. So, because really, I thought it was people like, as we already mentioned, Tammy Tiger, I thought, this is who we're referring to. So if now hearing this new definition, then is there a term or a terminology for us to understand that does actually reflect those who are, living in Summerlin, living in Green Valley, living in Reno, or just, is there a different term for that individuals? Because I think it's important to make sure that we're always counting and including everyone that is, officially of a tribal or indigenous nation.
Stacy Montooth, Nevada Indian Commission, for the record. I'd like to refer back to the Vice Chair's comments about aging himself. Please rest assured, you're still young and hip. It's important for everyone to know that the Stewart Indian Boarding School closed in 1980. So for most of that was just the other day. So again, Mr. Vice Chair, please don't feel old. I want to recognize and thank you for the follow-up question. And I'm taking notes furiously, but let me make sure that I'm clear on what information you're seeking. For the record, my reference to tribal IDs and their use in the process of voting is specific to registering. So I appreciate the question from our elected official on that. Regarding the definition of an urban Indian, first, you're absolutely correct. It is important. Like most things in Indian country, it is complicated. Madam, you are absolutely correct. Tammy Tiger is an urban Indian. She is a tribal citizen from the Cree Nation who has chosen to make Las Vegas her home. Technically, I am a Walker River Paiute, and my town hall, my admin building is in Schurz, Nevada, but I have a Reno address. However, I refer to myself as a community member of the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. So though I'm indigenous to this land, some might think of me as an urban Indian, just as you explained, because I don't live on tribal lands. I personally always introduce and identify myself as a citizen of the Walker River Paiute Nation. I hardly ever use the term indigenous. It's likely that is because in our traditions, prior to contact, Native Americans in the Great Basin did not homestead. In 2022, we still consider this is all the indigenous territories to the Nua, the Nui, the Washishishu. This is my home. So as important as it is to be transparent and to try to be as succinct as possible, tribal citizenship, tribal identity is extremely complex. It's very personal, and it's such an intimate identification. My guidance would always be to just respectfully inquire from the Native American that you're talking to. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you for that, and that really does help for my personal understanding of the different terminologies and definitions and what is valued by individuals in our community. So I will make sure to, because I know at sometimes it is important to know where people are living, where they're physically living, and those who, again, may have moved into the bigger cities and areas. We have few cities here, but our bigger cities are more urban cities and communities and stuff. But thank you for that. I really do appreciate that. And again, always happy to learn. We have so much to learn and connect on still. So thank you so much for that. With that, I will go ahead and close this agenda item, the presentation, and thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, Ms. Montooth.
Pisha, thank you.
We are, as I stated before, we will be taking a few agenda items out of order. So we will move now to agenda item 6, which is a presentation on voting for persons with disabilities. Our presenters, Ms. Catherine Nielsen, is the Executive Director of Nevada's Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, with Carisha Tashiro, please correct me if I did not pronounce that correctly, is the supervising attorney for Nevada Disability Advocacy and Law Center. They are both in Carson City and will be using a PowerPoint presentation as well. So when you are ready, I believe I can't, it's a little difficult right now to see, but I believe you've approached. So please, when you are ready, please begin your presentation.
Well, thank you so much. We want to start with thanking you for allowing us to be here today. My name is Catherine Nielsen. I am the Executive Director of the Nevada Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. Just in brief, the Council engages in systemic change, capacity building, and self-advocacy for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families here in the state of Nevada.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Carisha Tashiro. I am a supervising attorney and policy director with Nevada Disability Advocacy and Law Center. NDALC is the designated protection and advocacy agency dedicated to promoting, protecting, and expanding the rights of individuals with disabilities in Nevada.
Wonderful. So we are using a PowerPoint today, if you want to focus on that as well, but I will be referring back to my notes just as the last speaker has as well. So I want to start with the fact that there is an estimated 775,830 adults in Nevada who have a disability. This is equal to 1 in 3, or 32% of Nevada's population. If you take a look around this room, on the screen, or the room that you are sitting in, that is roughly 6 people. For Nevada, a little over 750,000 people can potentially be impacted by a change to the current voting laws, switching us from electronic to paper voting. In the 2020 election, roughly 59.7% of people with disabilities in our state exercised their right to vote. Nationally, about 1 in 9 voters with disabilities encountered difficulties voting in 2020. This is double the rate of people without disabilities. Among the people with disabilities who chose to vote in person, 18% reported difficulties compared to 10% of the people without disabilities who chose to vote in person. We're going to start by talking about accessibility. So accessibility involves much more than providing ramps. It is the key element of inclusion and the baseline of equal service. Accessibility refers to the design of environments, products, services, and is facilitating access for people with disabilities to the same level of access, independence, and privacy as anyone else. Ensuring effective access to information and services isn't only about meeting legal requirements or satisfying a policy checklist. It is about constantly striving to expand meaningful participation for all. Universal accessibility creates a world that does not separate anyone based on their abilities. The fundamental approach to the problem is that voters with disabilities are being offered a separate but equal approach to voting. And as such, separate is not equal. So what does this mean for people with disabilities when it comes time to vote? Providing equal access to all individuals with disabilities is the key element of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1992, or the ADA. The ADA provides a clear and comprehensive national mandate for the elimination of discrimination against individuals with disabilities, requiring state and local governments to communicate as effectively with people who have disabilities as someone without. When you create a universal polling place, you must design it in such a way that people with disabilities can independently vote in privacy. This is the foundation to the freedoms in America, as stated in the First and 14th Amendments. So now we're going to address the topic of voting access. When people with disabilities vote in person, they are supposed to be provided options such as an ADA voting machine. However, when a voting place has a separate accessible voting machine, it is not used as frequently as the primary method of voting. Therefore, poll workers don't spend as much time using the accessible voting equipment. As a result of this minimal use, poll workers often forget how to set up the equipment and how to instruct somebody with a disability on how to use it, if they've been trained on how to use it at all. Wait times to use the ADA machines can be extensive, leading to many people choosing to not vote at all, and other times leads to individuals with disabilities using the non-ADA machines. In order to use these machines, many people with disabilities may need assistance in reading the ballot and entering their vote. The experience is often that representatives that are assisting them in the polling locations are not conscious of their volume, and they read the ballot and answers loud enough for others to hear. Many in-person voting practices currently promote the removal of access, independence, and privacy. When people with disabilities vote by mail, many people with disabilities have expressed frustration when trying to vote by mail. Paper ballots can often not be read by screen readers, and thus the person may need assistance in reading their options and filling out their choices. As many people with disabilities take pride in their independence, this can create a barrier to those wishing to vote on their own privately. Those needing to use touch screens in order to select their votes now have to rely on someone else to assist them when filling out their ballot. There's many benefits of voting electronically for people with disabilities. And as I've discussed already today, access, independence, and privacy are vital to protecting the rights of people with disabilities when it comes to the right to vote. When working ADA accessible machines are provided at polling places and staff is fully trained on how to assist, people with varying disabilities are able to vote independently and privately, While federal law may dictate many decisions, this council recommends that you provide equal access to services and environments by encouraging the adoption of universal design practices and implementing accessible, inclusive practices into all aspects of public engagement, specifically voting.
So you may have heard in the news recently about proposals to change the way that elections are administered in many of Nevada's counties, and particularly in our rural counties. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about that and the concerns with respect to individuals with disabilities. So in the last month or so, county commissions in Washoe, Nye, Lander, Esmeralda, Lyon, and Elko counties have all heard proposals about various changes to election administration. And what they have in common is an effort to move away from accessible electronic voting machines. Nye and Esmeralda counties have already voted in favor of recommending that their county clerks use only hand-counted paper ballots. And other counties have not yet gone that route. Part of the reason may be that we are so rapidly approaching the primaries. But there is a risk that they could consider moving toward a paper ballot system in the future. And that is really problematic for individuals with disabilities because, as Ms. Nielsen described, paper ballots are not accessible. Individuals with visual impairment or disabilities that implicate dexterity or reading would require assistance from a poll worker or another individual to use a paper ballot, and that compromises their right to privately and independently cast their vote. Even if an accommodation is made by having, say, a single electronic voting machine at each polling place, then there's still that risk that poll workers won't be trained or familiar with the machine, or that technical difficulties could make that one machine unavailable. If having only one machine creates excessive wait times, there could be an equal access issue. And there's also the problem of who would determine whether a person has a disability sufficient to allow them to use that machine. And the last issue I want to highlight with a paper ballot only system is that electronic machines produce a ballot that's visually different than a paper ballot. So if individuals with disabilities are the only ones using those machines, then it would be easy to identify their votes. Under existing federal law, an all-paper ballot system is already prohibited. Title II of the ADA requires that state and local governments provide full and equal opportunity to vote and access to the elections process. And HAVA, the Help Americans Vote Act, requires that an entity conducting a federal election must have at least one accessible voting system at each polling location. And that system has to provide the same opportunity for participation for individuals with disabilities as is provided to everyone else. So there is some existing federal law on accessibility in elections. It seems that much of what is driving the push towards paper ballots is concern around election security, but the fact of the matter is that Nevada already has a safe, accessible voting system in place. A Democracy Initiative Education Fund report found that Nevada ranked highly in metrics involving voter registration, safe voting, security, and auditing. We have equipment test and oversight processes that limit risk and comport with federal standards. Our elections are secure. And in fact, Nevada has gone above and beyond to make sure that voting is more accessible to all. Last year, the legislature passed AB 321, which requires a ballot to be mailed to all registered voters, and that's helpful to many voters with disabilities who may have concerns about mobility, medical fragility, or transportation concerns. And then AB 121 specifically allows voters with disabilities to use the online ease system to cast their votes. Both of these provisions are incredibly important for protecting access to voting for individuals with disabilities, and we should preserve those in Nevada law. And then lastly, in light of recent paper ballot proposals, we must ensure that each polling site has sufficient numbers of accessible electronic voting systems for people with disabilities. As I described earlier, federal law protects this right, but state law can always mandate more specific or heightened protections, and electronic voting machines are essential for ensuring that individuals with disabilities have equal access to the polls, and that's critical to the function of our democracy. So that's all that I have. I think our contact information is on the next slide. Always happy to answer any questions. And thank you for your time and attention to this matter today.
Thank you so much for this presentation. With that, members, do we have any questions? I do not see any members that are signaling they'd like to ask a question. Again, thank you for your presentation and for the information. We're always glad to hear about the needs of individual groups and how we can help service. So thank you so much for your information and your time and your presentation today. And with
Thank you
that,
very
I will
much,
go
Madam
ahead
Chair.
and you're welcome. With that, I'll go ahead and close that agenda item and And we will move on to agenda item 7, which is an overview of the effective absentee system for elections for uniformed military voters, overseas citizens, and voters with disabilities. We have Mark Volashin, Deputy Director for Secretary of State for Elections out of the Office of Secretary of State. So, Deputy Secretary Volashin, there you are. Now I see you. And so it's, between looking in Carson and looking on Zoom, but I see you now. So please, sir, when you are ready, proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Miller, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. I'm going to pull up my presentation right now. One moment, please. Perfect. Are you able to see that, Chair?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you again. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Mark Volashin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, for the record. Today, I will be talking through agenda item number 7 in regards to the effective absentee system for elections, also known as EASE, a tool used by our uniformed military voters, overseas citizens, and now voters with disabilities. So to start with, I'd like to cover a little bit about the statutory authority that directs the use of these. It starts off with NRS 293D 200, which talks about and references a system of approved electronic transmission for uniformed military and overseas voters. This system, I will like to say, is proprietary, just for your awareness. And this is our state solution to satisfy requirements to support our Yukaba voters. Yukaba is a term some of you may be familiar with, but just a reminder, that's the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act. It's a federal act that was later augmented by the Military and Overseas Voting Enhancement Act. This is a solution EASE that we'll be talking about today. Again, is something that other states have similar versions of. In many cases, there are vendors that provide a similar type service, but EASE is our state-specific proprietary version. Assembly Bill 121 passed during this last legislative session also authorized requires the Secretary of State to allow the EASE system to be used by registered voters with a disability as well to both register and apply for and cast their ballots. And then lastly, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth in a few slides, there is an additional regulation that we adopted this year in 2022. One of the roughly 147 pages of newly adopted or modified regulations related specifically to the implementation of Assembly Bill 121 as it relates to EASE. And I'll talk through some of that here in a moment. So to start with, again, most recently, really between the 2020 election cycle and now the 2022 cycle, we did update the EASE system. Again, as it's proprietary, we're able to, in a much more efficient manner, address everything from legislative changes to if we are notified by advocacy groups about ideas on how to improve it. And that's certainly something that we talk to advocacy groups about. Then we are able to turn around and quickly improve and update the system. Most recently, again, some of these improvements included modifying the affirmation, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a few moments as well. And then we noticed that there was a trend where a previous method of electronic transmission that had been used through the EASE system, it would create an encrypted PDF so that the voter, when they were done, would email that encrypted PDF to their local election official at the county. We realized that again, there were some concerns about the security of it, and while we believe it was a secure system, the goal is to, again, continuously find improvements. So we've improved that system, and it now transmits it through a secure server. And also, not only will I think that be a little bit more of a secure process, but I believe it's also going to eliminate some of the concerns that voters had expressed, where when it creates that encrypted PDF and then you save it to the computer, but they have to try to track down where it was at on their computer to send it. I know I heard from a couple of voters that was a bit of a challenge. So this process will even further enhance and make that easier, not only for our military and overseas voters, but also for the voters who have a disability as well. The fourth bullet on this page, or slide rather, that I'd like to draw your attention to. Ease, because again, it was related specifically to the military and overseas voters. Previously, it had been turned on, so to speak, for only the federal elections. But now with the passage of Assembly Bill 121, ease is viewed as an ADA tool. And therefore, again, going forward, ease will be turned on for all elections across the state, county level, statewide, to ensure that, again, voters with a disability are able to continuously use it and get comfortable with the system, not only for a primary and general election, but also for any special election across the state. The new regulation that I referenced earlier, again, this was LCB file number R081-21, and if anybody has questions about it, I'm certainly able to provide that text as well. Some of the things that this regulation did, first and foremost, provides a little bit of clarity in regards to who exactly is able to use ease. I do want to state also that the regulations were developed not only with our staff here in the Elections Division, but also in close coordination with the Office of the Attorney General and the LCB legal staff, who are very, very helpful across the board in the development. So one, it defines the voter who is able to use ease, again, pursuant to Assembly Bill 121. It identifies what exactly needs to be explained, again, really directing the Office of the Secretary of State to provide some additional information and to update the affirmations. We wanted to make sure that was in regulation as well, so it was very clear why and what those affirmations were. And then lastly, there was a reporting requirement. We view the use of ease, again, by the voters with a disability to be a great opportunity for those members of the electorate. And we want to make sure that we're able to capture that so that we can report back to this body and the legislature going forward on our effectiveness of our outreach campaigns, so that we're aware of how many individuals are using it going forward. So here is the existing affirmation. Again, this one is specific, you'll notice in that first sentence, to the military and their dependents and the family members and overseas citizens residing outside of the United States. Again, just for awareness, so you can see what the initial affirmation looked like. The regulation that I referenced earlier added this part. Again, just simply stating under penalty of perjury that the individual who's going to be using the ease system truly qualifies. We've also included instructions on how to return the ballot. That top one, the return to the approved electronic transmission, is the one I referenced earlier. Again, that's through a secure server. It directly puts that document onto our server, and that enables the county election officials to download it directly, so it's not being emailed back and forth or, again, getting lost anywhere on someone's hard drive or that sort of thing, increasing the security and the ease for the individual who's attempting to return that ballot. There's also an option, of course, to mail it back in. We provide an explanation there as well, and that is, of course, postage paid. So our outreach efforts, since the end of the legislative session, we've gone to the best of our ability, tried to communicate with individuals, again, not only across the military and overseas citizen sphere, but also to members of the disabled community to notify them of this change. So that, again, these voters who otherwise are focused on their day-to-day lives and work and families and those sorts of things are aware of this opportunity as we approach the 2022 cycle. That outreach effort has not stopped. It will not stop, neither with the primary nor with the general elections. That's going to be a sustained and continuous part of our outreach effort going forward. We've gotten pretty good, I think, at being able to set up and coordinate Zoom calls in many cases, so we can reach out to individuals across the state who this would apply to, or in fact across the world as well. and then share the screen as I did during the legislative session to do a demo of EASE to show folks exactly how it works and how easy it can be to actually use to eliminate any sort of concerns or questions about the system. It also enables us to answer questions directly with voters as well. And again, those outreach efforts will continue going forward. The go live for the primary election is coincidentally today. We finished the implementation. The setup is a bit of a fairly in-depth and lengthy process. And while the members of the election division here, we've got a significant amount of turnover. We've got some incredible staff members now that I think you'd be very proud to see working very diligently to make sure that this system is set up properly and on time to meet federal deadlines so that the voters who are eligible to use it are able to do so. The go live date of April 29th is important because there is a federal requirement for Yukaba mail ballots. And again, that's the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen mail ballots to be mailed no later than the 45th day before an election, which, by the way, is tomorrow. Tomorrow's the 45th day before the election. So today it has to be turned on so that the mail ballots are sent out today. And then EASE will be turned on as well, so that those voters are able to, again, use this system going forward. We talked a little bit about the usage of the collection of statistics across all categories. In the way we have EASE set up with the analytics, it's able to track not only the individual who votes, their email address and phone numbers, those sorts of contact information. It of course does not capture who an individual votes for that uses the system. The secrecy of the ballot is extremely important, and that is not captured or maintained. But we do capture information about the individuals who use the system. It's so in depth, in fact, that if an individual gets 2 or 3 pages into it and then stops, we're able to tell. And if, for example, there were a series of individuals who stopped using the EASE system on page 4, or maybe after clicking a certain spot, and we identified maybe a bit of a problem there, we'd be able to tell so that we could address that and make sure that we figure out what was going on and improve the system. It does track return methods, again, so we can identify, and these are all statistics, of course, that we will provide back to this body going forward. So again, you can see the effectiveness and are aware of it. Following the primary, there's continuous work to be done. I think here in the elections division, there's a number of things that we say we're pleased but not satisfied with. This is one of them in particular. There's a lot of requirements that we've been working on to make it more secure, to increase the, to modify the affirmations, as I mentioned before. But there are some continuous process improvements that we're looking at and a number of other things moving forward that we'll implement prior to the general election. And then there's also a couple larger type processes that we're going to anticipate moving forward on following the general before the next election cycle. The go live, again, as you can see at the bottom of the slide here, for the general election is on September 23rd as well. And that concludes my presentation, but I am available for questions.
Thank you for that, Deputy Secretary Velashin. With that, members, do we have any questions? Assemblywoman Carlton?
Thank you very much, and good morning. So, very good presentation. I learn something every time we have these conversations. This isn't exactly on the presentation itself. It's more about a process question that I would like to ask you, and I'm pretty sure you're going to have to get back to me with the answer. So a number of the different counties are now having debates about not using the machines that were funded, and we've been doing a little bit of research into that. I'd kind of like to know where the Secretary of State's office is. If those counties decide not to use those machines, do you have a way to recall them back so that they can be placed in other counties or possibly into some of the Indian country so that there's more access to voting in other places that do want the machines?
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Carlton. Mark Washington for the record. If it's okay, I will get back to you with the answer to your question.
And I hated to sideswipe you this way. I apologize. I should have called you a couple of days ago to give you a heads up. But in hearing the presentations that we've heard earlier about access and about people having to drive 30 minutes to get to just a drop box, not being able to get registration done in different counties. So when we get to the point of being able to make sure that the people who want access have access to the ballot box, if those machines are not going to be used, and they were paid for, and the state invested the money in those machines, granted it was only 50%, but we still anteed up. And I even got thank you notes from some of the county commissioners and some of the clerks in those counties saying, thank you very much for funding this for us. If they're not going to be used, I would really hope you guys figure out a way to get them back and put them someplace else. They don't need to be sitting in a storage room someplace, not serving the people of the state of Nevada when it comes to this next election. So thank you very much, and I look forward to getting a response. And if you would send it to the chair and staff so they can share it with everyone, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Members, any additional questions? Okay, not seeing any members with additional questions. We will go ahead and close this agenda item and move on to our next presentation. We'll move on to agenda item 8 because we do have Joe Gloria, our registrar of voters from Clark County, here physically in Las Vegas and Grant Sawyer with us, and our next presenters will be on Zoom. So what we'll do is we'll have this presentation, agenda item 8, then we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll move back to agenda item 5, just so everyone's aware of what the plan is for the very soon future. With that, welcome again, Joe Gloria, our registrar of voters. This presentation for agenda item 8 is on an update from Clark County on the preparations for the 2022 primary election. And whenever you are ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to be here to share some information with the committee. I have to open up and say that I'm working at a slight disadvantage today. I had surgery on my eyes this week, and although I'm very excited that the cataract has turned on the lights again for me, I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing. So please excuse me if I don't recognize when the committee is speaking to me directly. I want to talk a little bit, opening up, about some changes that we've been working on that were considerable, but there was change that needed to be made as far as what we're doing to deal with the mail ballot processing within Clark County. And so one of the main goals for us, and as we were supported by and instructed by our county management and the commission, to make sure that all of our mail ballot processing is taking place within one facility. Whether you were aware of it or not, because of the speed at which we moved to going with the all-mail in the 2020 election, we actually had to ascertain a way to find more square footage so that we'd have room for the increased counting board and all of the processes that become necessary when you're looking at about 500,000 mail ballots coming in. So with support from the county, and we've been working since at least October, we're looking really good now so that we'll be able to add about 15,000 square foot of working area within the warehouse so that our counting board will be in one room. We were challenged in the 2020 election in that we were using a facility that had multiple rooms, and it wasn't easy to see the entire process as things were going on for supervisors and even for observers who we wanted to make sure and give an opportunity to watch what was going on and give explanations for exactly what was going on in the process. So now that we have a nice big area, it'll be very easy for the observers to watch what's going on, and for what we call ambassadors that we hire and educate on exactly what those processes are, to explain to them exactly what's going on. We've also created another area where we're able to have redundancy in our mail ballot processing machine system, which is our Agilis machine. So we have 2 of them now, which again increases the efficiency of what we do and gives us the ability to process a large number of ballots in a short period of time. Our training has moved across the street to a new facility so that we have all of these processes going on. So there are now dedicated rooms in there where we're dealing with our manual signature review and the teams and the bipartisan groups that are working on doing that. So long story short, There was a tremendous amount of work and financial support that was put forward by the county to make sure that we could do that. And looks like we're going to finish just on time for the primary to make sure that all of that facility is ready and will be used for this election cycle. Another change that comes this year is that the cities are now being supported in the even years. So a couple of years back in the legislature, they moved those to the even years. So now they will start to enjoy higher turnout in the municipal elections and no cost to support those elections. As it doesn't cost us anything really to add those offices onto our ballot since we're already serving all of our voters for all the other races that are included in the even year. So we're excited about that, and we've been working directly with the cities to get that taken care of. Going back again to the mail ballot process, I wanted to make you aware that my staff has been very busy in the off-season, and we've benefited from a network of election officials and some nonpartisan groups who have sponsored the ability to go and observe election activity in the state of Colorado, which, as far as mail is concerned, is considered one of the gold standards for how they go about processing mail ballots. So I was able to take my staff at no cost as a result of support from the NCSL, Vote at Home, and some other groups, and Amber McReynolds, who communicated with us and encouraged us to go. And as a result, we were able to go to Denver County, Weld County, Jefferson County, and Arapahoe and observe how they go about processing ballots. And it was a great experience for us, and we learned a lot. And as a result of what we saw in October and early November, we immediately came home and began work to identify funding for some additional equipment that we've also brought in. It was a tight timeline. However, thanks to the support from the county, we were able to purchase some high-speed mail ballot readers, which read ballots in at almost a 10 times quicker rate than our previous system, which really wasn't designed for reading mail ballots of the large number that we were receiving in 2020. We've also included the use of extractors, which basically is an automated system that adds another level of privacy to all of the voters for my counting board, because the mail ballot envelopes go into this machine and slide across without giving the worker any ability to see the voter's name or their party or anything along those lines on that return envelope. And then in an automated fashion, it opens up that envelope and they're able to pull it out. So that's another important piece of equipment that we've added, and we've also brought in some equipment for ballot on demand and ballot duplication system, which will allow us to efficiently do that in an automated fashion. So we want to thank those groups for sponsoring and giving us the ability to go out to Colorado and learn, and also for the support from county management to allow us to go and do that. Mail ballots, the election is upon us, and so starting today, as Deputy Secretary Welashman was mentioning, our overseas ballots are going to go out effective today, as the deadline is tomorrow, so they'll start going out overseas. Our out-of-state ballots will start going out no later than the 5th of May. Our local ballots will go out no later than the 25th of May. And on all of those ballots that are going out, they all go postage paid. So any voter can just vote their ballot and with the postage paid envelope, put it in through the USPS, and we're definitely confident that the post office will get those ballots back to us. However, as long as it's postmarked by election day, June 14th, we are going to accept those ballots to the fourth day after that, which is the Saturday, June 18th. All early voting and election day vote center sites are mail ballot drop-off locations as well. You can look into a lot of jurisdictions and you won't find many that are offering that type of service to the voters as we do here in Clark County. For election day, that's 125 sites plus the clerks in the election center, for a total of 131 locations throughout the valley where any voter can come and securely drop off their mail ballot. We'll have staff that is trained there. These security boxes will be chained to something to secure them. They'll have bipartisan workers who are there, and all they will simply do is check to make sure that the voter has signed their envelope, and they will accept that and bring it in to be processed. And then following that June 18th deadline for the postmarked envelopes coming in from the Postal Services, we also have the CURE running through the 20th of June. So that will give those voters an opportunity whose signature did not match in our system. We're statutorily required to communicate with those voters. If we have an email address or a phone number, we will contact them by both of those means and also through the mail to let them know that they are in the cure process. We are also going to continue the use of a tool that was put in place by the Secretary of State's office that's called Text to Cure, which brings an automated process in for these folks who are in the cure process to take care of that simply using their telephone. So we're taking care of setting that up for the primary, and the Secretary of State, I believe, will be doing it statewide for the November general. Early voting, we're very excited to say we'll go back to what we consider normal coverage. The challenge that we dealt with in 2020 with the COVID pandemic was it was tremendous, the work that my staff did to deal with that and provide a safe environment for voters to come out during the November election, whether they chose to vote by mail or whether they chose to come out and vote in person. We had a safe environment for them to take advantage and get out and cast their ballot. But this year we'll be going back to the malls again, which is what we were doing for many years, because it's always been our policy that we want to go where voters shop, play, get a bite to eat. High traffic areas are good areas for us, and we try to set up as many locations in those types of areas as we possibly can. So the grocery stores, which is also a very popular site with the voters in Clark County, very often they wait for their sample ballot and they find wherever they normally shop for groceries and find out where we're going to go and when we'll be there in that area, and they take advantage of knocking out two birds with one stone. So all of that is all coming back. There'll be over 30 sites daily for the primary, and then for the general, we'll also add our college team. The colleges are out of session during the primary election, so we don't support that team in the primary. However, for the general, as we have done for many years in the past, we have a mobile team that will travel to UNLV. There's 3 campuses that CSN allows us to come in and provide voting, and Nevada State College as well. So we have supported that program for many years, and it does show great turnout and gives students an opportunity as they are very busy trying to work on making sure they're getting their schoolwork done. So that's a great opportunity to reach out to them, and turnout has only increased since we've started the use of those teams. For Election Day, we're still going to have the 125 vote centers that we provide throughout Clark County. And it's important to mention that none of the rural areas, as a result of going to a vote center, lost any of their voting locations. In fact, they all of those rural locations that we used to vote when we were precinct-based still have a vote center. So whether you're in Sandy Valley, Indian Springs, Mesquite, all the way down to Vegas, Laughlin, Boulder City, Searchlight, you still have your Election Day vote center with a drop box to support. We've been working hard to get everything proofed and prepared. Keep in mind that we're federally required to provide all of our information in Spanish and Filipino. So what that means is we have to have staff available to proof not just the English in over 270 ballot styles, but the Spanish and the Filipino, plus all of the information in the brochures that we provide with our early voting and vote center documentation that we provide to the public and provide to our local advocates who help to share that information in their communities. All of that is coming out really soon. Despite the paper shortage, we have been secured the ability to print these documents. However, because of the paper shortage, we're not printing as many as we have in the past. The sample ballot will come out the week before early voting starts. And we always like to encourage, the legislature put in the ability for people to request an electronic sample ballot. And one of the things that I really like to make really clear to voters is that when you sign up for an electronic sample ballot through the registered voter services on our website, you actually receive that information prior to any of the voters who receive the paper sample ballot, because we're able to send that when those images are ready to go. So they get their information a little bit earlier. We were really excited when that opportunity came about as a result of the law that passed. However, I really would like to promote it, and I hope that the committee will share for those of you who live in Clark County, with your neighbors and colleagues and friends, family, you should consider going electronic with that. especially with what we're dealing with in the paper shortage. It's the same information, you get it. Just make sure that you keep that email address that you provide as current. Don't change emails and don't tell us because you won't receive your information. A little bit more information before I'll open it up for, I'll be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have for me. The redistricting that we had to complete, it was a tremendous amount of work as well that my staff completed. And as a result of getting that information late because of COVID and the census release coming late, we were unable to provide that information in the manner that we normally take advantage of, which is through the voter registration card that we send out leading into every even-year election. We did make that information available for all voters through our Registered Voter Services portal on the website, starting in mid-February. However, it will be printed on each voter's individual sample ballot. So on the back page where you see your address, and normally you do have your party there for the primary and your precinct number, you will also have your new districts listed there. And it was through no fault of our own that we were unable to get that information out the way we normally have in many years past. It only occurs every 10 years, so that'll be on the sample ballot. And with that, I just want to mention that for the general community, we try to encourage them, if we have anybody who is interested in working the polls, and in particular if you speak Spanish or Filipino, it's very important that we meet those federal requirements to have those translators out in the field for early voting and for the election day vote centers. I'm told that our numbers are good. However, things happen on election day and during early voting. People get sick or for some reason or another can't come. So we like to have a long list of alternates. So please encourage your colleagues, friends, and all of your neighbors that if they're interested in working, to call 455-VOTE, and they'll get the information and find out how they can sign up to help us out with that. And with that, I'm happy to report that despite all of the work that we've had to do to implement all of the mail ballot process, not only are we ready, but we made improvements to the process. I can't say enough about my staff and the work that they've done to make all of these changes come to fruition, and also the support that we've received from the Board of County Commissioners and my county management, who are always behind us in making sure we have what we need. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee might have for me.
Thank you, Registrar Gloria. I see a question coming from Assemblyman Matthews.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gloria. Good morning to you. Just want to make sure I heard you correct. You said that local ballots will go out no later than May 25th?
That is correct.
Do you happen to know whether there is a more precise date within that time span where you anticipate that they will likely go out, or if there's a target date, or maybe it's over a multi-day span, or is that just sort of a little bit up in the air, save for between now and the 25th? Thank you.
Madam Chair, with your permission, I'll reply directly to the committee member.
Yes, please direct.
Assemblyman, yes, it's, we don't like to make predictions because sometimes things go wrong. It's a tremendous job when you have to print 1.3 million ballots to get ready for a jurisdiction. I can tell you that the performance from the vendor that we lined up with in the 2020 election, it's hard to believe that they're able to do that, but I've been through their facility and toured, and they've got a very secure, awesome setup there with what they're available to do. They can get those ballots out once they're printed and stuffed in one day. And although the facility is in Phoenix, when they drop, voters here in Clark County usually get it the very next day, the large majority of them. So the 25th is my statutory deadline, so I guarantee you that we will follow and make sure that we meet that deadline. But if the printer is ready, we're not going to delay getting ballots out to voters, but I don't like to predict because you just never know what might happen. There could be a malfunction in the system, and although they have redundancy, might run really close to that date of the 25th, but it could be a little earlier if they're ready.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members, any additional questions?
Question?
Chair Orangel?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Registrar. Thank you for being here. I think back to when I first turned 18 and first voted here in Clark County, and the only option was election day voting. That was it. You stand in line if you could for hours if it was a very busy general election. And now there are so many obstacles that have been removed with early voting and with the mail balloting. And I definitely want to thank you and all the staff of the election department who've worked so hard to provide those different avenues for people to participate in the democracy. One question I have, with the switch to vote centers, one concern was that a lot of folks who waited to vote to Election Day, traditionally like to vote on Election Day, would, getting confused as to the old traditional polling place versus a vote center. Are you finding that people are getting used to the vote centers now, or are there still folks looking for their old polling place? And I'm just wondering, how are you seeing that switch to vote centers on Election Day?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Orenshaw. And if you remember back then, there were precinct-based polling places, so you had to go to the correct polling place too, and you work across town. So those challenges are gone. I've seen in the years since we've implemented the vote center that it's a very easy adjustment to make because you can't go to the wrong site. So when we put out our sample ballot, I know that you've looked at yours and you've studied it, but we put a map in there, and we actually have a key to help you find it on that map. But it doesn't matter what site you go to, your ballot will be available, so it's much like early voting. So it's very difficult for the voter to make a mistake. As long as they're going to any one of those sites that we have listed as a vote center, that they're going to be able to get processed and vote their ballot. So it just makes it that much easier for them on Election Day, knowing that no matter what happens to them that day, in the urban area, we designed the layout of those sites so that they wouldn't be more than about 2.5 miles apart. We try to stick to that. And then again, in the rural areas, we didn't remove one site in the rural areas. They all kept their sites, so they're vote centers now. So if you're the Pepsi guy or the Frito-Lay guy and you deliver in Mesquite or Laughlin, you can still go over there and vote that day on your break. So it's been a big convenience for voters, and I think they've adjusted well, and they enjoy the flexibility in being able to do that.
Thank you, Registrar Gloria. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Assemblywoman Dickman, your question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gloria. I was just wondering if you could explain exactly how the text cure process works.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Dickman. It's a very simple process. It's basically an app that you can go through for text to cure, and the voter verifies their identity by providing a picture of their ID that they take with their phone and attach to that record, and then they have to sign in that text to cure to state that they are affirming that they are who they are, for lack of a better term. And then they send that electronically to us. That goes to a secure file where my office, they check that 3 to 4 times daily to make sure that they're keeping up with those as they come in. They verify the information, and as long as they've provided exactly what they're required to provide through the text to cure, then their ballot is now moved from the cure process to ready to be counted and put in the stacks to go to the counting board.
That sounds good. Thank you. And I hope your vision returns to normal quickly.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Nice to see you.
You're welcome, Assemblywoman.
Madam Chair, I have a question when you have a moment.
Yes, proceed, Senator Gansard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on that question, our driver's licenses and our IDs now have a scannable, a digital mark that's scannable on the back. Do you just take the picture of the front, or do you use some sort of technology when by scanning the reverse?
Thank you for the question, Senator Gansard. I'm afraid I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I don't think they take a picture of both sides, but I do know that the application is pretty straightforward and gives the instructions. I think it's just the front side of that. But I would have to get back to you. I'll be happy to get that information to you to let you know if it requires both sides.
Thank you. That would be great. I just know the digital side, you can't really duplicate that. There's no way to modify it. So thanks for getting back to me.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Registrar Gloria, can you submit that information to the entire committee as well?
I will take care of that, Madam Chair. I'll make sure and get it to the liaison, Haley. I'll get it to Haley so she can distribute.
Okay, perfect. And I just have a follow-up question to that too. This process that to be able to cure it through the text, you said this was something that was established through the Secretary of State's office?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. The Secretary of State started the use of the text to cure. It's actually an application that came from the state of Colorado and Denver. There was a tremendous amount of work that came out of that county when they moved to all mail, and Amber McReynolds has been a leader in everything that has to do with mail ballots for a long time. So it was a team that was a group of programmers that actually used to work for Denver County in Colorado, and they've broken out now and are building tools for jurisdictions to use throughout the country. But it was the Secretary of State because there is a cost. It's not a free service. So the Secretary of State led the way with that and provided it in 2020. For some reason, they couldn't get that funded for the primary, so we're taking it on in Clark County on our own to make sure that we still have that process available for our voters here in Clark County. And for the general, they've assured us that they'll have it available for the entire state again.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate all that you do for our voters. Not seeing any additional questions, I will go ahead and close this agenda item. Thank you so much, Registrar Gloria, for your presentation and for all the work that you and all your staff do, as you've mentioned.
Thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair, and committee members. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With that, we will go ahead and take a 15-minute break and return at 11:37, and we will hear Agenda Item 5. Hello, everyone. Thank you for everyone being prompt and returning from our quick break. We will now open up Agenda Item 5, which is a presentation on the uniformed military and overseas voting. Today, our presenters are Scott Weidman, Deputy Director of Federal Voting Assistance Program from the U.S. Department of Defense, and Heather Udy from State Legislative Affairs Specialist, also from the Federal Voting Assistance Program. They will be presenting via Zoom, and there's also a PowerPoint presentation. So thank you so much for making yourselves available to present to us here in Nevada today. And whenever you are ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Heather Udy. I'm the State Legislative Affairs Specialist for the Federal Voting Assistance.
Excuse me. So I have a simple request. It is coming in here very groggily and kind of not clear. Can you try that again? I'm not sure if it's your connection. I think you're frozen now.
I apologize. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, much better. Much better.
Okay.
But you still visually
great.
appear frozen.
Okay. All right.
There you are.
Is this better?
Yes. We all love technology when it works, right?
You know, a couple years down the road and we still have these issues. I do apologize. Again, my name is Heather Udy. I'm the State Legislative Affairs Specialist with the Department of Defense's Federal Voting Assistance Program. With me today is our Deputy Director, Scott Weidman. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today, and also thank you again for just working with us on some of our scheduling conflicts to allow us to present later. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Yep, thank you.
Wonderful. Great, I'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about Fvap, so that's the Federal Voting Assistance Program, as well as Yukaba. We'll talk about our voting process for Yukaba voters. We'll look at Nevada and Yukaba voter statistics, what that landscape looks like in Nevada specifically. And then finally, we'll wrap it up. Our Deputy Director will give an overview of the state of the overseas voter, as well as the state of the military voter.
Ms. Udy, can I just make one small suggestion that is so impactful for all of us Nevadans, that we will hear your. Thank you so much. We will be able to hear your presentation even better if you refer to the state as Nevada and not Nevada.
I apologize. Yes.
No, it's a major issue for us. And I know the first time I went to Montana, I was like, is it Helena or Helena? Please tell me. So we are a hard A Nevada, and thank you so much for that.
No, I would much rather say it correctly. This is clearly my first Nevada presentation, so thank you for correcting me. I'll go ahead and continue then, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
The Uniform and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act passed in 1986. This is also known as Yukaba. So if you hear me refer to this acronym, that's what we're referring to. I know a few of our presenters mentioned it briefly earlier. Yukaba requires that 50 states, all 50 states, the U.S. territories, and D.C. allow protected voters to register and vote absentee in federal elections. A couple amendments to be aware of. The Help America Vote Act amended Yukaba to require states to notify voters of the reason for rejecting a registration application or absentee ballot request. And later in 2009, the Military and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act, that's the MOVE Act, amended Yukaba to require states to send requested absentee ballots 45 days prior to an election for federal office, as well as to provide those ballots electronically if requested. So I know we had mentioned, or a few presenters had also mentioned that 45-day deadline, and this is where that comes from. A few of the federal protections for Yukaba voters include requiring that all states allow a citizen covered under Yukaba to register to vote and request an absentee ballot using a single form. That's the federal postcard application. We'll get to this in a few slides. Also requires states to send absentee ballots to Yukaba voters no later than 45 days prior to the federal election. Requires states to offer voters a way to receive their blank ballot electronically upon request. And it's allowing citizens covered by Yukaba to use another form that we prescribe, the federal write-in absentee ballot, as a backup ballot to vote in any election for federal office if they do not receive their requested state ballot in time to return it before that deadline. Citizens whose voting rights are protected under Yukaba, here are a few examples. So we have our active duty members of the armed forces, of course, Merchant Marine, Public Health Service, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Commission Office Corps. We also have their eligible family members and dependents of the uniformed service personnel. And finally, we have the U.S. citizens that are residing outside the U.S. So think of potentially contract workers, maybe that's DoD civilian workers, that's Department of Defense civilian workers, as well as humanitarian aid workers, just to name a few. A few of Fvap's responsibilities, so the Federal Voting Assistance Program, what we do is work to ensure that these service members, their eligible family members, and overseas citizens are aware that they do have a right to vote, and they have what they need to do so successfully from anywhere around the world. The Director of Fvap administers Yukaba on behalf of the Secretary of Defense. We provide training for those who give assistance to Yukaba voters. We maintain our various forms. So I mentioned the FVCA as well as our federal write-in absentee ballot, and we have a voting assistance guide that we work on every other non-election year to assist our voters as well. We maintain our website. We work on various reports to Congress, ensure that we are complying with federal codes, regulations, DoD instructions, collect data through surveys, and working with our states as well on that. And we work with states on waiver requests when those are needed potentially. And then of course, last but not least, we ensure that state and local election officials are aware of their duties and responsibilities for these Yukaba voters. So we're going to chat a little bit now about the Yukaba absentee voting process. This is a quick overview of what that looks like. So if we start at the top left bubble, the absentee voting process for a Yukaba voter often begins when the voter completes the federal postcard application to register and request their ballot. Again, federal protections require states to offer voters a way to receive their blank ballot electronically upon request. From there, two things may happen. The voter will receive and then fill out and return the ballot to their election office, and the election office will the election will then receive that ballot, or the voter will receive the federal write-in absentee ballot, which is used as that backup ballot that I referred to in the event a voter does not receive their ballot in enough time. If they receive the federal write-in absentee ballot, they will fill this out and return it to their elections office. So just to kind of reiterate some of those steps that we had just mentioned, and also give you a visual of what the federal postcard application looks like. We have it here on the screen. Again, this is really the first and foremost step for a Yukaba voter to fill out our FPCA. It can also be found at fvap.gov. This allows them to both register and request their ballot. Nevada does have obviously specific deadlines and submission procedures that vary from state to state. So voters are able to find that at our website as well. And we also list various dates and deadlines that they need to know. And step two, when they fill out and they'll then send their ballot when it arrives, we have recommended due dates for these Yukaba voters that we advise for them to send it in to make sure that it's sent on time. Again, this is another example of our federal write-in absentee ballot. That's that backup ballot that I had mentioned earlier. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about Nevada and Yukaba statistics. These are our 2020 numbers. We submit a report to Congress after elections. So these numbers are from 2020. I just wanted to make that note. So we have in 2020 that Nevada had 8,847 registered and eligible Yukaba voters. You can see here that 40% of them were service members, 60% were overseas citizens. For the 2020 general election, Nevada transmitted 8,850 ballots to Yukaba voters and received a total of 7,258 returned. So this gives you a quick overview of what those numbers look like across the nations and of course our territories as well. From a rejection standpoint, Nevada rejected a total of 34 returned Yukaba ballots in the 2020 general election. Again, here's a quick overview of what that looks like. All right, and now I'd like to turn it over to our Deputy Director, Scott Weidman.
Good afternoon. Is the microphone working?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, okay, great. Just to follow up a little bit on Heather's talking about the 2020 stats. Those stats came from the Election Assistance Commission and their post-election survey that they did, and that information comes directly from the states. That survey did show also that in 2020, there were 1.2 million Yukaba absentee ballots sent out nationwide to Yukaba voters. Go ahead, you can go back one, Heather. And then, so of nationwide, of the 1.2 million ballots sent out, 900,000 were actually returned and 890,000 of those were counted. And then for that federal write-in absentee ballot that Heather mentioned, that backup ballot, in 2020 nationwide, there are 33,000 of those that were sent in by voters. Now remember, with that ballot, voters can also send in their state ballot if they do get it before the election deadline, and they can submit both ballots, and only one is counted. The localities have procedures in place so that only one of those ballots will be counted, and 24,000 of those were counted in 2020. So that backup ballot is just there as a fail-safe. Most folks get their ballots in plenty of time and are able to return it, but there were 24,000 folks that were able to cast a ballot using that backup ballot in 2020. So now I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the survey instruments and the results of those that Heather mentioned. I'll go ahead to the next slide. The first section of slides here is talking about overseas citizens. So remember, the federal law covers military members on active duty and their family members who are absent from their local jurisdiction, both stateside and overseas, and then all U.S. citizens outside the United States. So these next few slides are just talking about the citizens outside the United States, not the military or their family members. So what we do is a two-part method to gather information. We're required by Congress to report to them on the voting rates for overseas citizens. For many, many years, there was no way to determine what that denominator was, just how many U.S. citizens there were out there around the world. So we worked very closely with some statistical folks and figured out a way to estimate the number of U.S. citizens in various countries around the world using both U.S. federal government resources like the IRS, census, those type of things, as well as other government sources. So the UK might have a census of the number of U.S. citizens living in that country, that sort of thing. So gathering all that information together, we pull together an estimate of the number of U.S. citizens in various countries and living in various parts of the world. And these, as you can see, are the top 10 locations where U.S. citizens resided. No big surprises there. One thing to point out is that Mexico shows 80,000. However, we do know that the number of U.S. citizens in Mexico is well above that. These numbers reflect the folks who are actually eligible to vote, meaning they're 18 years or older. So we know that in Mexico, there's many U.S. citizens that are below the age of 18, some of which may have been born in the U.S. and then returned with their families back to Mexico. So we expect in the coming years, in the coming cycles, that many of those folks may decide that they do want to vote absentee I'm not sure if they're from Nevada or not, but they might be able to. You might be hearing from them. So that's just something that you might want to know. Okay, next slide. So the other half of the survey information that we utilize is directly from that EAC survey, where this, as far as the numbers that the states report of the ballots that were sent out. As we said, there were over 1 million ballots sent out in 2020, and then we couple those with the estimates in each country as to kind of figure out what the turnout is from the U.S. citizens in each country. And overall, worldwide, we had about 7.8% turnout. Remember, this is not military. This is just the overseas citizens. And then in some countries, Germany was much higher. The U.S. citizens in Germany voted at a higher rate than most other places in the world. And this is a combination of factors as to why they may or may not have voted. And that goes to the next slide, where we look at those who return ballots. So the good news is that of those who showed interest, requested and got a ballot, 95% of them actually did return a ballot. So folks that are active, and they are returning ballots and being able to vote. For those who didn't return a ballot, there's many reasons why they may not have. A lot of times it comes to the nation's infrastructure, the country that they're living in, and the ability to mail ballots out or use that local country's mail system, which means they don't have to then go to an embassy or consulate or some other source or even pay for a private courier to have that ballot returned. In 2020, of course, that was further complicated by COVID and many of the shutdowns and restrictions that occurred due to COVID, and planes weren't flying, as well as just the ability to walk out your front door in many countries were curtailed for periods of time, let alone going to a post office or whatnot. Next slide. So what we do is we look at the domestic voting rate in 2020 as 79.2%, and then that overseas estimated rate of 7.8%. So we see the gap of 71%. We know there's a certain number, that residual gap at the top, that aren't going to vote. They don't have ties to the U.S. They don't have an interest in remaining active in politics or in sending in ballots. But then we have that obstacle gap folks, that 39%, almost 40% of folks that, based upon our survey, it appears that they may have wanted to vote or at least had an inclination to vote, but for either real or perceived reasons did not vote or weren't not able to vote. And of course, in 2020, some of those reasons were stronger than they might have been in the past. But so that's their goal. Our goal at Federal Voting Assistance Program is to communicate through embassies and consulates, through social media, any avenues of American citizen groups or organizations overseas that have outlets and resources for American citizens, so they're aware, one, of their right to vote. Many people, once they leave the U.S., they may think they can't vote anymore, but at least for federal offices, they are able to participate, and we want them to know about that. And then to do what we can to allow them to work around those obstacles that they may face wherever they might be. Okay, next slide. And then, of course, you see that first one, the folks that were able to get their ballot electronically or requested their ballot and got electronically were almost 2 times more likely to get their ballot returned than those who requested their ballot and or asked for their ballot to be sent to them by mail, because that's a much quicker and more reliable way, perhaps, in many places in the world, depending on the infrastructure available, for them to actually get their ballot. We do know that not everyone has access to the internet around the world, but there are many places where they can get that. As you know, it's still underlying paper process in most states. So they still have to print out that ballot. They still have to fill it out, sign it, and then either photograph it or scan it in and then send it back to the state. But having an electronic option to receive the blank ballot gave a much more likelihood they were able to return it successfully. And then also, the folks with the electronic ballot return reduces the obstacles, but only for voters in the states like Nevada who have that options available. We did have 20 states in 2020 that the by mail process was the only way to return the voted ballot. Next slide. So now that was all about the overseas citizens. Now we're going to talk about military voters. So go to the next slide. And we had about 2/3 of the military who were registered to vote in 2020, lower than the civilian rate, but still that kind of tracks over time as to the relative numbers there. Next slide. And here we see that, you know, almost half of the military did vote in 2020, so lower than the general population. There were 30% who didn't want to vote, that we actually, in our surveys directly to active duty military members who reported to us that the reason they didn't vote was they didn't want to. And again, similar to the overseas citizens, we see that 21% said they couldn't complete the process. And the major reasons, again, they had difficulty requesting their ballot, their absentee ballot didn't get to them, they had difficulty when they were attempting to register. So the laws are in place, and we work very closely with the Secretary of State's office and the 16 counties in Nevada to ensure that the information is out there so folks are able to do that. And we appreciate the cooperation of the Secretary of State's office as well as the counties. When these calls come in to us from a voter overseas who want to or having difficulties, we're able to call that county and many times work to a resolution on that. So we appreciate their help on that. As well, the counties and the state will call us if they have specific issues that come up during the election year that may need a resolution as well. Next slide. This chart shows that even though the voting participation rate was low relative to the general population, the trend continues that where the interest is higher, the voting rate is higher, and that did again happen in 2020. Another thing to mention is that for folks in the U.S. Armed Services who did avail themselves of any of the assistance that's available, meaning that they go to the fvap.gov website to use the forms or assistance there, or you utilize the service or installation or even unit voting assistance officer network of assistance that's available to them, had a much higher propensity to register and vote in the election successfully. Next slide. And here you can see a quick breakdown of the various methods used by military members to cast their ballots in 2020. Those folks who are absent from their jurisdiction would be voting absentee. Obviously, there's 25% of them that were in person, but 75% were away because of their duty station, away from their home where they would register and vote locally if they were not in the military. Many of them did request and receive their ballots and vote by mail. There's still a good number of folks in the world that are just not comfortable using any electronic processes when it comes to voting. That's why the federal law only requires that the blank ballot is sent to the voter electronically upon request, because that's a blank ballot. There's nothing secret there. That's public information, what's on a blank ballot. So they can get the ballot that way, but then returning it, there's folks that just aren't comfortable perhaps using email or online. Now, we know Nevada has the nves.gov program that allows military voters to use their common access card to sign their registration form. All military members have a common access card, which has this little chip on it, and they're able to use that on a day-to-day basis in their regular work to sign documents, to sign emails, and that allows them to have some level of confidence about who sent it. Nevada does allow for voters to, for military voters to use that signature on that common access card for that purpose. I don't believe it's very widely known or widely used at this point, but the Secretary of State's office has put that process in place. Next slide. And these are just a few things as far as some of the overall issues that voters may face that we're trying to work on through our communications programs. One is that in this day and age with purchasing things online, buying shoes online, whatever, as soon as you press that button to purchase something, you get emails and notifications on your phone saying it's been purchased, it's in a box, it's on a truck, it's on a plane, it's at your door. So it's super, people are getting super used to having every little bit of a process known to them. And then when it comes to voting, they may only get, one email saying, okay, you're registered, and another one saying, okay, we got your ballot. So that, We always suggest for state and local authorities to give as much information as possible throughout that process. And I know Nevada is very good with that from the electronic perspective. And overseas voters, of course, rely very heavily on those electronic email and electronic communications to stay connected. And they do appreciate anything they hear from the states, so they know that things are out there. In the old days, when it was all by mail, they would send off their request card, and then months later, a ballot might show up or not show up. It just kind of went off out there. So it's really helpful to those folks. We talked about that common access card already. And obviously, as we talked about as well, the underlying process is still a paper process for Yukaba absentee voting. So there's still that requirement to print things off and sign it and then scan it back in many cases. So that can be confusing. So we appreciate the states and localities that do accommodate that and reach out to the voters for curing as need be. And the other thing that we work on is that the folks that are new recruits or folks that are being deployed, all their installations have it at the in-processing and out-processing on any installation. They're all given a voting brief and one of the federal postcard application cards, so they're able to fill that out and get that in so they can keep their local election office up to speed with where they currently are and how to get information to them. We also request that we have a mandatory distribution, and we suggest that every member of the military and their families send in a federal postcard application every January. That way, in every state, that card is good for at least that calendar year. So they'll be sure to get all the election ballots for federal offices in that calendar year. Additionally, we send out an email at the 90th, 60th, 30th day. So basically, it's once a month. We send out an email to every active duty military member, notifying them of the elections that are occurring in the next 90 days so that they'll be able to have opportunity to register and vote and then get that ballot in enough time to successfully vote it and return it. I think that's all we've got. So, Madam Chair, we'd be happy to take any questions if you or any of the other Assembly folks have questions.
Thank you for that. And we're actually both houses when it comes to our interim. So we do have Senate members join. No, perfectly fine.
Perfect,
we do have Senate members joining us as well, because they will correct me later if I don't address it. So thought I'd mention that as well. With that, members, do we have any questions? Okay, Vice Chair Orangehall.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And one question I have, you'd mentioned earlier that some of the uniformed or overseas voters could vote perhaps only on federal races, some could vote in the state and local races. And I just wonder, what can you explain which overseas or uniformed voters can vote in which races and why?
So I'm not 100% sure for Nevada what the rules are with that. We have on our federal postcard application form, we have the ability for voters to notate whether they're permanently overseas or temporarily overseas. And in many states, the more permanent folks overseas may only get the ballots for federal offices. And then folks that are planning to return, might be a student overseas for a short period of time, they'll be able to get the ballot for full offices. So I do not know offhand. I'm sure somebody from the Secretary of State's office would be able to answer that. Some states do provide a full ballot for every voter, regardless.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any additional questions? I don't see any coming from Carson or virtually or here in Grant Sawyer. I would just like to clarify something as well, because when it comes to Nevada specifically, we have a population of over 10% military and veterans and military families. So this is really something that, it's important everywhere, but something that we really have a lot of regard for. And so my question also on the summary page, where it says most active duty members and overseas DOD civilians are not aware that Nevada accepts the DOD Common Access Card on the voting forms. Would that pertain to active duty members who have been stationed here in Nevada and who may not be getting a Nevada driver's license, but are choosing to vote and vote for state or local elections that want to register to vote here, but am I on the right track that they could then, they may not have a Nevada driver's license, but they're here, they want to vote here, so they will register to vote and they can use that actual card, which would enable them to do so as verification?
So that card is simply a token to allow a level of assurance about their identity when they're filling out or submitting the voter registration form. Before any of that would happen, though, the voter would have to make a decision to consciously change their voting residence to the state of Nevada to make sure that and then make that conscious decision to know that they're no longer a resident of Florida, Virginia, wherever else they may have lived beforehand. Once they make that decision, they would have all the other processes, which may include getting a driver's license or having property or wherever that may be. And then they would send in that federal postcard application form to the Nevada county where they are residing. And then the county would process the form. So one of the ways that they can sign the form without having to print it out and physically sign it and scan it back in and then resend it for those military voters, the Secretary of State's office has a process where they can digitally sign it with that common access card. So that's different than a digitized signature is one where a human eye can look at it and see that it's a signature. Digital signature, which is what this process is just like it has your name, the date and time that you signed it, and then that's used by the locality to verify that that was the voter that signed it.
Okay, so not necessarily. Yes, it did. So not necessarily in lieu of, but in addition to, it is another accepted form of.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Members, any questions? Not seeing any questions coming from members. Again, I would really like to thank both of you for taking time out. I believe we're in different time zones as well, to present to us here and for nailing the pronunciation of Nevada like true Nevadans, and really just appreciate this information coming from a federal level.
We're happy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And with that, we will close the agenda item, which was agenda item 5, and open up agenda item 8, we are going to open up agenda item 9, which is an update on the pilot program for conducting risk limiting audits of elections per Assembly Bill 422 from 2021 and Senate Bill 123 from 2019. With us, we have Deputy Secretary of State for Elections from the Secretary of State's office, Mark Voloshin again. He will be presenting via Zoom, and there is a PowerPoint presentation. So, Deputy Secretary, when you are ready, please begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you again. I'll share my presentation right now. Okay, good afternoon. As mentioned, Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Mark Voloshin, Deputy Secretary of State for Elections for the record. I will be covering agenda item number 9. And this is an update regarding the pilot program for the conduct of risk limiting audits. To start with, a little bit on the mandate. Again, this initiated originally with Senate Bill 123 in the 2019 session. It was then modified during the 2021 session in Assembly Bill 422. The big change that came from that modification in Assembly Bill 422 was to move the date of the full implementation. Originally, it had been implemented, or was going to be implemented on January 1st of 2022. Assembly Bill 422 shifted that date to January 1st of 2024. Again, it's a pilot program, really started in 2019 and has continued on. And we'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing since its initial direction here over the next few slides. So what is a risk limiting audit? And I think this is something that it's worth at least addressing up front. Again, I believe this is only 12 slides total, so we'll be respectful of your time. But just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, this is the bottom line. It is another post-election audit to help reassure voters and specifically the commissioners before they certify an election. More specifically, it limits the risk, hence the name risk limiting, of certifying a contest with the wrong winner. And the process by which we do that is fairly interesting, but we'll talk through that here in a few moments as well. The idea is that it's conducted, again, after the election, but before certification, and that's certainly the goal, but I'll talk through some of the challenges with that timeline and what exactly that means. And it does require a software program. It's fairly in-depth in the use of algorithms and statistics to identify how this process occurs. But essentially, after an election, once all the ballots have been received, the software identifies a number of the ballots and we conduct this audit on them. And there's a couple different ways that can be done. So a couple of terms to be aware of. The first is a cast vote record. And this is an extremely important term and a thing that I want you to be aware of. Each county has an election management system. Each election management system can export a cast vote record. It's a spreadsheet that essentially, without any PII, no personally identifiable information, and nothing attributing that ballot back to the voter, but it's a spreadsheet of what the voters, who they cast their ballot for. I have an example and I can show it if there's any interest in it as well. But these are, again, publicly available documents that the counties have. And it's just a spreadsheet that goes across. And you can imagine for a general election, for example, under the office of president, it'll say candidate A, candidate B, candidate C. And if that voter in that horizontal row cast the ballot for one of those individuals, it would just say one. And then the next race would have another indication of who that individual cast a ballot for. Again, nothing tying it back to the voter, but that is a very important part of this process that comes from the election management software. Of note, there's been a lot of discussion about transitioning away from mechanical devices and tabulators and those sorts of things, voting machines. Those counties that did transition to a hand count, if they did, would not create a cast vote record. So that process would invalidate the ability to conduct a risk limiting audit, something that we're looking closely at to see if there's another way we can do that. But that's just really for your awareness. A ballot manifest, again, another spreadsheet. This is important, and this ties into the physical storage of ballots, which is also extremely important. If you kind of picture in your mind's eye the Clark County warehouse, for example, and in their secure facility, there's a location with rows and rows of boxes that are also secure, again, where the actual ballots are stored. This is important because the information on that digital cast vote record has to be compared physically to the actual ballot itself. So in Clark County, of course, where there's 1.3 million registered voters, it's a much more complex process. But even in the counties with less, if you have 20,000 ballots from an election, or a series of ballots that you're required to maintain by federal and state law for 22 months from both the primary and the general elections, it's important that the ballot manifest identify, again, where those actual ballots are located. And there's some pretty crisp and tight organization to that, so that when it's, as you go through the process, you're able to retrieve those ballots as part of this audit process. There's a random seed that's used to identify, again, this is part of the algorithm and the statistical basis of the software. Randomly select a number. We use a 10-sided die, roll it 20 times, it gives you a seed, and that then leads to the random number of ballots based on the statistics that you end up identifying for the audit. So of the types of risk limiting audits and the methods that we use here, I'm going to cover three. The first one is ballot comparison. So in this method, as you can picture a mail ballot, for example, it's imprinted with that unique identifier during the tabulation. The software or the voting machines themselves do something similar, using the Fvap that I believe you're familiar with as well. But the idea is that by having this imprint on the ballot itself, the mail ballots, when they're tabulated, then they're stored, and then when the the cast vote record as part of that audit software identifies you need to go to this box, this batch to identify a ballot, you can retrieve it appropriately. When you take that ballot, you come back, you confirm the imprint ID on that ballot matches what's in the cast vote record. And really you're looking for discrepancies between what's on that digital cast vote record and what's on that physical ballot as well. Again, verifying that the machine had done exactly what it's supposed to, and that no ballots have been, or votes have been flipped or anything like that. Ballot polling is another method that we use. So this one's actually looking for in comparing the the margin of victory. So in this one, there isn't a requirement for the unique identifier. It isn't used. Again, in this case, again, the location, container 42, batch 15, for example, very similar in the process, looking to see if there was a 5-point margin in a certain race. Statistically, you don't have to pull every single ballot that was cast, but there's a part of what the software does is identify a number. And then you retrieve that number of ballots, and then again, using the magic of statistics, if for example, it says to pull 90 ballots, or whatever the number the software comes up with, you'll notice that as you get close to that 90th ballot, the exact margin of the race is reflected in that sampling that you selected. And when in doubt, again, you can continue to take more, and that sampling, the margins will be, again, reaffirmed as well. Again, the intent there is to validate the margin of victory. There's a hybrid option as well. Again, there was some discussion about how, again, doing ballot comparison and ballot polling. We originally had thought that we weren't going to be able to use imprinters with ES&S, but again, bottom line is we've worked through this and now understand that we will be able to do a ballot comparison or risk limiting audit after following the 2022 primary election. So what have we done so far? Since this was implemented, we've done a number of pilots, really, and this is something that not only here at the state, but the county clerks and registrars have also eagerly jumped on. Every single opportunity that we could have to do a risk limiting audit, to learn more about the process, to get better with our organization, to work through questions about the software, how it works, what we're looking at, we have absolutely done so. You can see in the top bullet a list of the counties where we conducted risk limiting audits in January of 2021, then later, again, with the in April and July, again, of also 2021 with the Boulder County primary elections and general election, and really continue to move forward. Not only are we doing risk limiting audits at every possible opportunity, as you can see in a couple of the bullets there, that numerous other counties, adjacent counties, and really from across the state, clerks and their staffs are eagerly attending risk limiting audits in other counties, again, just so we can ensure that we're aware of the process, comfortable with how it works, and working through any sort of questions or challenges well in advance of the January 2024 full implementation date. So going forward, and for 2022, specifically related to the primary risk limiting audit pilot, we're going to do, in addition to county-specific risk limiting audits, we're also going to do a statewide audit in July as well. Again, the idea with the statewide contest is you identify a statewide contest, the software identifies the location. In this case, it wouldn't just be on certain rows of a one warehouse, but indeed is really across the state. And so that way, again, there's a statewide audit as well as countywide contests as well to ensure, again, additional opportunities for practice. Now, the two things I do want to comment on here. One, again, somebody's probably thinking, wait a minute, statewide audit in July. July, if I remember right, is after the primary election, and certainly after the 10-day requirement by statute to certify. Why wouldn't that be done beforehand if the intent here is of a risk limiting audit is to ensure that there isn't a false or improper certification? Well, part of it, again, is one, these are pilot programs, and it's certainly something that we're working on in part because it's extremely time intensive. As you all know, again, following election day, the clerks and registrars have 4 additional days to receive mail ballots that are date marked appropriately, 2 additional days after that to conduct their signature verifications, for the total of the 6 days of signature verifications after election day. On that 7th day, of course, we are doing the provisional ballot comparison across the state where everyone's provisional ballots will be provided to the Secretary of State, and we will compare them to make sure no one's trying to pull a fast one and do same-day registration and cast a provisional ballot in Story, Lyon, Douglas, Carson, and Washoe, for example, and try to bounce around in an area like that. So that's all on the 7th day. While that's going on concurrently, the clerks and their staff are working very hard to draft paperwork for the county commissioners to make sure that they can meet the certification timelines, along with, quite frankly, addressing a number of public records requests, legal challenges, requests for either recounts or election challenges as well. And all that, again, really on top of the fact that they, by that point, would have been working about 12-hour days for the better part of a month. So this is something that as we do these pilot RLAs, we're really keenly aware of the fact that it's a very tight window to actually do this prior to the county certification. It's a process that when we did some of these early on during the pilots in 2021, they took, in some cases, almost a week to conduct. And that's, again, the small county-specific election, and in many cases without any other distractions or too many requirements outside of the normal day-to-day requirements that many of our clerks have on top of their election-related duties. So this is something that in July, as we continue to look forward to these and identify ways to improve, the plan is, first and foremost, to not interrupt or otherwise degrade the requirements leading up to that 10th day and really all the requirements, the post-election requirements, but then to hone our processes and continue to find ways to make it better and to reduce the amount of time, increase efficiencies, organization, storage, so that we can meet that timeline moving forward and as we get into 2024. So the next steps, again, we continue to learn from these. And these are the sort of processes that we aren't learning in a vacuum. We are talking to a number of other states who are doing it, doing risk limiting audits and doing them well. We're asking opportunities and trying to identify things that we can adapt and adopt to make the process more efficient. We're going to continue learning lessons and capturing them through the primary and the general election. During 2023, every single opportunity that the clerks, registrars in the state have to conduct a risk limiting audit will be taken advantage of, and we will certainly continue to refine these processes moving forward. When we begin our post-election regulatory review that we will begin in January of 2023, we will also, again, have some draft regulations relating to risk limiting audits that we are continuing to modify and enhance the draft versions that we have. So that as we move through the 22 election cycle and continue to learn, we'll continue to adapt those so that we can move those through the appropriate regulatory process, including workshops, adoption hearing, et cetera, beginning in January of 2023, so that those are fully in place prior to the 2024 implementation date. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I stand by and available.
Thank you so much. Members, do we have any questions? Senator, Assemblywoman, any questions?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, not seeing any questions. Thank you so much for your presentation, Deputy Secretary Voloshin. And with that, I will go. With that, and I apologize, I forget there's a delay, a few second delay between our speaking communication. So thank you so much. With that, I will go ahead and close agenda item 9. And we will move on to our last agenda item, which is public comment. So again, just reminding everyone to please keep your comments to 2 minutes, as well as please state and spell your first and last name so that it can be recorded for the record correctly. Those who are choosing to call in to make their public comment right now, please go ahead and dial 669-900-6833. And when prompted for the meeting ID, enter 872-9419-1010 and then press pound. So we will begin first here in Grant Sawyer in Las Vegas and then move to anyone wishing to make public comment in Carson City and then to the phone lines. So with that, we have someone here wishing to make public comment. Please proceed. Ms. Tiger, is your microphone on? The light?
Oh, that light?
That light.
It blinked and then, thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Tammy Tiger, Tammi Tiger, and I'm here today speaking in my capacity as a Native Vote organizer. I am a citizen of Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I'm descended from 3 tribes that are commonly known as the 5 civilized tribes, who treated with the United States in 1830 and were removed from our homelands on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, which was called Indian Territory. I wanted to also add that in the 50s, my family was part of the BIA Relocation Act, which relocated my family from Oklahoma to Los Angeles. And that is part of the history and the education that we do with our families to explain, who we are. And it came up in previous comments, so I just wanted to be able to share that. I grew up working as an urban native in Los Angeles. My family was very active in urban Indian centers, which are traditionally set up to support the Native Americans that are living away from their homelands. And so I work here today in the last 20 years with the Las Vegas Indian Center and a lot of the outreach work that happens with our urban communities. I wanted to thank you first for the agenda item and asking the important questions that you all had earlier today with Director Montooth's presentation. Due to the systemic policies of erasure that our people have endured over the years, educating our audience is always a part of what we do and what is necessary to do, just because it hasn't been done in the school systems all the way up to now. I wanted to share the definition of treaties and tribes with you all today for the record. Indian tribes are distinct political entities whose inherent sovereignty predates the United States. The sovereignty is reflected in the government-to-government relationship between federally recognized tribes and the U.S. government. As Director Montooth mentioned, her office is a direct relationship with the state, the governor, and the Nevada's tribal nations, and then also serves the urban Native population.
And Ms. Tiger, it went by quickly, but I just want to let you know that your 2 minutes are up. So if you could just wrap it up, because we do try to be consistent, because we know that there's, fairness comes in consistency. So if you could just finish up with some points, and then please email us so that we can still have those on the record.
Will I be able to add to those points?
You mean in what you send written? Yeah, we don't know.
Okay. I will say then really quickly, I wanted to speak in support of AB 422 and the top-down database to have a disaggregated data field that accounts for tribal affiliation as our nation-to-nation status as citizens of tribes, not just a racial group. And that secondly, with AB 321, that we empower our counties to be able to provide more access to the polls. And sorry, wasn't able to summarize that fast enough, but thank you.
Thank you.
I'll stop there.
We appreciate it, Ms. Tiger. Great. Is there anyone in Carson City?
Yes.
Wishing to make public comment? Excellent. Please proceed when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Terry Huffman, TerriHuffman, and I'm with Convention Estates. I'm on the state director's team, and I'd like to make a quick statement because I know it's only 2 minutes. The framers provided means for the people to amend the Constitution, means which virtually circumvent federal officials. The President and the federal courts are given no role whatsoever in the amendment process. Congress is authorized to propose constitutional amendments if it pleases. it is obligated to call a special convention to propose constitutional amendments if 2/3 of all states' legislators demand it so. But Congress is given no hand in the actual ratifying or rejecting of the proposed amendments. The amendment process is slow, and it was made this way so deliberately in making changes to our organic law. People should not be stampeded by demagoguery, mob philosophy, or false promises. The public should have ample time to think, study, debate, and reflect before making constitutional changes which affect them and their prosperity. As James Madison put it, the amendment process was designed specifically to guard against any extreme faculty which would render the Constitution mutable. This is an excerpt from a book called We Hold These Truths, written in 1976 by Larry McDonald, the past president of the John Birch Society, 1983. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Looks
Is
like
there
we
anyone
have
else
one
in
more.
Carson City?
We have one more, Madam Chair.
Excellent, thank you. We see him approaching. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is John Quant, John-Quandt, and I'm with Legislative Liaison for Convention of States, here to speak in favor of a Convention of States resolution. Thank you, Madam Chair, members, and staff for this opportunity. I submitted an email earlier via the address with a speech, a link to a speech from Senator Santorum on Monday. He gave in support of the Convention of States, and also an article by authored by Professor Nielsen and published in the Marquette Law Review that provides details supporting the Convention of States. And I just wanted to spend the rest of my time here just pointing out one of the many issues with the federal government tyranny and overreach and not actually doing what they're responsible for, and referencing our southern border. I don't know if most of you know here, I think Nevada has its highest percentage of undocumented aliens per capita in the United States. And we are one of the 30 states where fentanyl deaths have doubled in the last 18 months. The fentanyl crisis has gotten out of control. It's not just the drug addicts either. They have ways of dispersing this through aerosol, through ventilation systems. It can be put in your liquid and sprayed on your food. And there are counterfeit pills, including Xanax and Adderall and over-the-counter drugs that it's showing up in now. And this is all because we have a government that, instead of focusing on what they're responsible to do, protect citizens at the border, they're focusing on creating a misinformation czar. We need to get this under control. And Convention of States, the states have to get it under control. It's not going to be the Congress that's going to do it. It's not going to be our executive branch that's going to do it. We need to sit down and we need to take responsibility and pass this resolution like 19 other states already have. The 20th is just about to also. We only need 14 more after that. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, committee members. I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Let's move to our phone lines. Broadcasting, do we have anyone on the phones?
Thank you, Chair Miller. The public comment line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, and it doesn't appear that there's anyone else in Carson City approaching. Is that correct, Assemblywoman?
That's correct.
Thank you. There's no one else here in Grant Sawyer, and broadcasting again, does it appear that anyone is dialing in?
No, ma'am. There are no callers in the queue at all.
Okay, well, with that, we will go ahead and close the agenda item for public comment. I want to thank everyone for all of the members for participating, engaging, and again, for encouraging and participating in the ability to run an efficient committee meeting. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.